I have a question for you guys watch. If you were a teenager or a young adult in the late 80s or early to mid 90s, what did you do on Saturday night? I'm guessing some of you were at home watching MTV. The staple of the network's Saturday night programming was Headbangers Ball, and it would go on to become one of MTV's most memorable and beloved shows during its initial 8-year run. It also helped introduce mainstream audiences to heavier and harder rocking bands you wouldn't see elsewhere on MTV or even hear on radio. Debuting in 1987, Headbangers Ball's origins dated 2 years prior to 1985. It was a strange time for MTV as the network at the time was trying to get away from anything that resembled metal. I'm using the word metal because that's how the press was reporting it at the time, and that's how the book I Want My MTV also characterized it. But it's pretty much an all-encompassing or catch-all term including hard rock and glam metal, at least for the sake of this story. It was by 1984 that 1/3 of all of MTV's videos were considered metal or hard rock. Writer Deborah Frost would write at the time, "Suddenly rock's most extreme fantasy genre looked bigger, brighter, more fantastic than ever before," adding, "and MTV is in the fantasy business." But then in 1985 something changed. The CEO of MTV Networks, Bob Pittman, announced that the channel would be scaling back on metal videos, revealing at the time, "We want to play music that's in the cutting edge," adding that metal was simply a fad, and would go on to say, and I quote, "a quick, crass, easy buck for record companies." I want to point out that the reporting during this time is very strange, as some news reports claim that metal was cutting edge, while the bosses at MTV claimed that it wasn't. Pittman, for his part, was wrong, and the data proved otherwise. In 1985, according to Billboard magazine, nearly 20% of the top-grossing touring acts were considered metal, and record sales were consistent, as were radio requests. One thing that was also evident was that bands who didn't get a lot of exposure on MTV, like Iron Maiden, were still hugely successful. One thing that was also happening around this time in 1985 was the PMRC debate, or the Parents Music Resource Center, which ultimately went after hard rock and metal acts, claiming that this type of music was having a negative impact on America's youth. Soon enough, everyone's favorite hard rock bands and metal acts were under the microscope, as were radio stations and programs on television that played their music. Billboard would interview MTV Senior Vice President of Programming Les Garland in 1985, who claimed that the network curbed the amount of metal videos they were playing, starting 3 years prior in 1982, going on to say that the PMRC had no impact on the network's decision. Also, once again, the data was contradictory. In my opinion, I think MTV was more concerned about the PMRC and keeping advertisers happy, as well as trying to be everything to everyone. Garland would claim that it was audience reaction that led to the network scaling back hair metal videos, and it was by the middle of the decade MTV was playing about 3 to 4 metal videos an hour, something that he claimed audiences didn't like. However, the same article pointed out that MTV's program Most Requested Videos consisted of those very acts the network was trying to scale back on, like Motley Crue, Ozzy, and Kiss. But also happening behind the scenes at MTV was this constant battle between the so-called old guard led by Bob Pittman, who was more concerned with pleasing advertisers, and the new guard who wanted to give music fans more of what they wanted. MTV's general manager Lee Masters would recall in the book I Want My MTV, metal was always divisive at the network. Young men watched MTV the most, so if we played more hair metal, we'd get higher ratings. But that ran counter to the cool, cutting-edge image we were presenting. The on-air promotion people were creating fabulous promos, talking about how hip and edgy we were, and then we'd play White Lion. Twisted Sister's Dee Snider and his people soon got wind of MTV's change in direction and pressured the network to keep playing metal videos, and so they agreed to come up with a compromise. They would come up with a show that was devoted to metal bands, provided that Snider hosted it, which he did. It was called Heavy Metal Mania, and it was originally a weekly show that aired on Thursdays starting in October of '85. It featured news, interviews, and music videos, and by May of '86, the show had now moved to a monthly format. It would run for about a year, but it would end when Snider, who was working for free, asked to be paid. MTV, who were notoriously cheap, told him that his form of payment was free publicity for himself and his band. Here's a little snippet of Dee hosting the show with Ozzy.
"I'm Dee Snider, taking a break from Twisted Sister to bring you the best heavy metal video in the known world today. And what do we have here? My God, what a surprise! Ozzy Osbourne! Oh man, my co-anchor man for the show today. Ozzy, let's get going."
By the summer of '86, as the network celebrated its 5th anniversary, MTV's relevance was being questioned. The LA Times would write an article about the network's dire situation that read, "Ratings were slipping, morale was low. More important, MTV's reputation as a proving ground for exciting new pop artists had sagged as the video network concentrated on playing a top 40 style format of proven hitmakers and bland pop artists." To reclaim its relevance, the network in 1986 Networks launched the program 120 Minutes that shed a light on alternative acts like Dinosaur Jr., Morrissey, the Jesus and Mary Chain. Rather than bring in a host that was part of the actual alternative or underground scene, they reused the same DJs who were already on the network. Martha Quinn, Downtown Julie Brown, and so forth. The show, however, helped MTV's credibility, and now MTV was thinking that they should do the same formula for heavy metal. Also helping was that Bob Pittman soon left the network, and MTV soon received a shakeup. They were playing on average 100 to 110 videos in constant rotation, so the new people who came in wanted to tighten their playlist, and they soon doubled down on metal and hard rock, bands like Whitesnake, Great White, and Motley Crue. The move also helped bring MTV back into relevance, with the LA Times writing in 1987, heavy metal, which had largely disappeared from MTV several years ago, is back in force. New music, which had been relegated to late night Sunday specialty show, is popping up more frequently, and radio programmers are once again looking to MTV for the latest hits. Ironically, Pittman, after leaving MTV, started his own 24-hour heavy metal radio station called Radio Lisa. Apparently, he had a big change of heart on metal. By 1987, MTV turned things around. Debuting on April 18, 1987, Headbangers Ball's inaugural show was hosted by Lemmy and Phil Taylor of Motorhead, and they would introduce clips by Cinderella like the song Somebody Save Me, Dawkins' Dream Warriors, Still of the Night by Whitesnake, and Kiss's Tears Are Falling, as well as Poison's Talk Dirty to Me, and of course Motorhead. There were a total of 23 videos played on the inaugural episode. As for the term Headbangers Ball, that came from the UK thanks to a DJ named John Brent who used it to name his shows. He would DJ at clubs across the UK, and he would play hard rock and heavy metal songs that were on the charts at the time. The show continued with guest hosts as well as primetime VJs until they settled on their first official host, a guy named Kevin Seal. Seal was on a dance show called Club MTV and had his own show on the network. He hosted until the spring of '88, but he wasn't a fan of metal, admitting in the book I Want My MTV, "I hosted Headbangers Ball for a few months. I wore a leather jacket from Wardrobe. Those heavy metal people who try to induce concussions inside their own brains, I have respect for that, but I'd never buy a record or go to a show. It made sense to have Adam Curry replace me. He had his own leather jacket." The network would find their new host in Adam Curry, who had previously worked overseas in the Netherlands doing radio and TV, and even hosting the popular program Countdown. Headbangers Ball would play a wide range of bands, everything from Bon Jovi to Anthrax, and while the show had a dedicated fan base, there was always criticism coming from the fans, with Curry recalling in the book I Want My MTV, "I would be on news groups talking with fans. I always got asked, 'Hey man, why are you playing Bon Jovi? This is our 3 hours.'" While Adam Curry would host the show for the rest of the decade, things were about to change as the 90s rolled around. In 1989, Guns N' Roses frontman Axl Rose called MTV, asking them to audition a friend of his, Riki Rachtman, who owned the LA club The Cat House. Rachtman made a comment to Rose one day about how he'd love to have the Headbangers Ball gig, and so Rose picked up the phone. By Rachtman's own admission, his audition was just to be a regular VJ and not the host of Headbangers Ball. It was over the next several months that Rachtman would be brought in to be a guest VJ or even do some stuff from his hometown of LA. But then finally in 1990, he got the call to be the permanent host of Headbangers Ball. His first episode would see him interview Anthrax, and Rachtman didn't really know the band, and they generally gave one-word answers. And his second episode wasn't much better either, when Michael Schenker came on and just basically played his guitar the whole time. But one huge advantage Rachtman had over other hosts was that he was already friends with a lot of the bands who appeared on the program, since some of them were regulars at the Cat House. Despite Rachtman becoming a fan favorite, the audience still criticized him over the videos chosen for the show. But little did the audience know that Rachtman, during his whole stint with the program, never chose what music the show played. Soon enough, Headbangers Ball expanded from just playing music and doing interviews to actually having man on the street segments, to following bands on tour, having contests, and even hanging out with the bands. One future star who worked with the program would be Blind Melon's Shannon Hoon, who got a job on the show thanks to his Indiana connection with Axl Rose. Hoon would be Rachtman's receptionist before his band blew up. But by the mid-90s, Headbangers Ball started playing a wider range of bands, including punk groups like Rancid and The Offspring, and it upset some of the show's longtime viewers, and by early 1995, the show was done. There's 3 basic theories of why the show ended. One is that it simply wasn't relevant anymore. Riki Rachtman would admit that the show was now playing the exact same videos that aired during MTV's primetime hours. For example, if they played Self-Esteem by The Offspring during primetime, he thought they should have played a more obscure song from the band on Headbangers Ball. Then in January of '95, Rachtman was responding to fan mail when he wrote the wrong address on one of the letters. Rachtman's letter to the fans stated that he didn't think ballads should be played during Headbangers Ball, and that top 40 metal and hard rock songs shouldn't be on the show either. Apparently, the letter having the wrong address was returned to MTV's offices and forwarded to one of MTV's higher-ups, and it wasn't long after that that Rachtman got a call telling him not to show up for work, and that was the end of the show. Sadly, there was no farewell episode, but instead just a few best-of compilations. Rachtman shared another theory for why the show may have been cancelled. Here's a preamble for what happened.
Well, when you hear the acoustic version of Plush, that was done on our show.
It was the last time things went smoothly with these Stone Temple Pilots.
One time the Butthole Surfers were on the Headbangers Ball, and we were introducing Stone Temple Pilots video, and Gibby says,
"Wow, Stone Temple Pilots. Who does that band remind you of?"
"Who doesn't it remind you of?" Oh, they were not happy with that. And Weiland just caused a huge stink.
I guess Stone Temple Pilots were really sensitive to a lot of criticism at that time.
Weiland wouldn't do our show, wouldn't do a whole bunch of other stuff.
We were supposed to do a 4th of July shoot with them in LA, and that got squashed.
The big stuff that he was supposed to do for MTV, he canceled because of what I said. My producer called me, and Nancy's like, "Look, everybody's pissed off at you. You know, you've got to apologize to Weiland for saying that." So I ended up calling a dean from Stone Temple Pilots and talking to him about it, and they put me in touch with Weiland.
He called and apologized, and I'm sure that was, really awkward for him.
And I basically kissed his ass.
And they came back.
And for the record, I think the new Stone Temple Pilots doesn't sound like anybody, and it's good.
Apparently, despite Rachtman and SDP making up, someone at the band's label, Atlantic Records, still harbored resentment years later about the comment, and they were friends with some of the higher-ups at MTV who didn't like the Headbangers Ball host. They were basically looking for any reason to fire him. It was following the cancellation of Headbangers Ball, it would be replaced with a weird show called Super Rock following month, which featured videos and interviews with some of the same artists who were on Headbangers Ball, but it just wasn't the same. It would be hosted by tour manager and, I'm not kidding you, Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's one-time nanny, Jackie Ferry, but it would only last a few years. I do want to point out the European version of Headbangers Ball would go on for about 3 more seasons, and Rachtman over the years would reach out to MTV to bring up the possibility of shooting a final episode, and he even offered to work for free, and they continually said no. Then in 2003, he got a call from MTV saying that they were bringing the show back, and they asked Rachtman who would be a good host, and he goes, "Me," and they weren't impressed, but he did name one person, and that was Jamie Jasta from the group Hatebreed, and he got the gig, but it just wasn't the same show as the original, and the reboot would air on MTV too, and the spin-offs in the years that followed just haven't been able to capture the magic that was the original show. So let me know what you guys think. Why was Headbangers Ball canceled, and what era of the show was your favorite? Let me know in the comment section below. We'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories.